favorite tool store. See if you can guess where we are today. And got a strong weight 2-ton hydraulic engine hoist with load leveler, 284. Looks good to me. All right, there goes the nice man back in the store, and he brought our toys out for us. Man, that looks like fun. I only hope that taking the engine out will be half as fun as putting the hoist together. Alright, this is a video series on rebuilding a Corvette engine, not on the assembly of an engine hoist. Well, how about that? Alright, let's get over to the Corvette and start to pull this engine out. Alright, to facilitate the removal of the L-82, we're going to remove the fan, the water pump, the power steering pump, the lower radiator hose, the heater hose, and the fan shroud as well, because ultimately I think that radiator is going to get replaced, and of course the fan shroud will go back after that to retain this stock look. So, all right, let's get busy. All right, we're going to go ahead and take the fan off first, along with its pulley. Hopefully there's enough room here to do what I'm doing. I can't recall what the exact sequence of events is supposed to be. All right, hey, look at that. We're getting there. All right, we got our pan underneath there. Let's disconnect our heater hose. And let's disconnect our lower radiator hose. You always have to cut these off. Even when you cut it, you still got to peel it off. This water pump's been on here 20 years probably. I'll probably replace it too. This is not the original water pump, although I do have the original water pump that came off this car. I even have the original spark plugs that came out of it. Huh, that's an interesting thought. Take the original water pump to someone and have it remanufactured. That would be a good idea. That would be an interesting bit of originality. Let me get those two water pump bolts off. Yeah, this bolt hole is definitely going to need to be cleaned up. That's right, just spill that stuff down in the motor. Yeah, boy. Alright, I guess we'll loosen up the power steering pump next and get that belt off there. Alright, time to get the power steering pump off this engine. So in lieu of the standard practice of loosening the power steering pump via usual means, I'm just simply going to take it, disconnect it right there at the bracket. These two bolts hold it against the engine block. So I'm going to go ahead and take those two bolts out, and that should free that up really easily. And another thing you'll note here, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but that alignment on that power steering pump really never has been very good. But it's always worked, so I just kind of left it alone. But seeing as how we're pulling this motor out, I think what I'm going to do, when we get this thing back in here, I'm probably going to take maybe a spacer here and here on the inside next to the block and try to take this pump and and move it out just a little bit to get that alignment just a little bit better. So just a little improvement for the long term. All right, let me get those 2 bolts out of there. All right, we can't forget about the this one left here on the back side of the pump. And the reason why is that this bracket goes over here and connects to the right. There's a nut. It's really hard to get to, actually. It's right up there on the engine mount. It's pretty silly, but it is what it is. All right, ended up taking out that bolt right there on the back side of that bracket. A 1/4 inch ratchet with a 9/16 worked out pretty well. So there we go. All right, 1 power steering bracket out. And I really didn't feel like disconnecting the power steering lines right now. I just wanted to avoid a mess. I may fiddle with that a little bit later after we get the engine out of the car. All right, I've got the passenger side head back on, got the intake manifold back on, and got the carburetor lift plate kind of placed there just to check that out and see what it looks like. These engines come with a couple of brackets to lift the motor out. I guess they were counting on them breaking a lot. It's just a little joke, guys. And the next fun bit we're going to tackle is disconnecting the drive shaft, unbolting the transmission, and removing it so we can get this engine pulled out of the car. All right, we're back. I was looking at a Haynes manual out of curiosity for removing the engine for a C3 Corvette. And in the manual, they talk about doing it without removing the transmission. Now, I suppose you could do that. I'm sure a lot of people have done it in the past. But I don't think I'm going to bother with that, because let's say you want to put this thing back in. You've got to line it up perfectly. I really don't want to do that. So what we've got here is a chambered exhaust system. It doesn't really have mufflers. It has these chambers. It has a unique sound to it. It's sort of a 60s pony car thing. They were putting them on Camaros in the late 60s. Now, I really dig the sound at idle, but I may change it out because it's pretty doggone loud, especially on the highway. So since this is a 78, clearly I removed the catalytic converter, and the cars after 75 did not come with the transmission mounting bracket for dual exhaust. And this thing right here, you see that flange right there over the exhaust pipe? That's a bracket that you would get on a 74 and prior car that had true dual exhaust without a catalytic converter. So I ordered that and installed it on this car so I could put these dual exhausts in. Now, you might ask yourself, wait a minute now, the crossmember has 2 holes for dual exhaust. In 78, they were putting in. This is stock for 78. They had 2 holes, but they just didn't use one of them, which I don't really get, because as you know, 75 and later, they went with a single catalytic converter with a Y pipe and a single pipe down, and it split back off into 2 mufflers. It was pretty silly. But why they were still putting these 2 holes in here, I always assumed they just had leftovers after 75. And they just kept on putting them in there. Hey, if you know something about this, about why this crossmember on a 78 has 2 holes when they weren't putting true dual exhaust in these cars in 78, fill that in down below. Let's let everyone know, because that's a mystery to me. All right, I've been hawing around trying to figure out the best way to pull everything out of this car, considering the fact that this thing is on jack stands in my garage. I thought maybe I'd take the transmission out, and then I've run this around in my head 3 or 4 times now, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and take the engine and transmission out as in one unit. I think trying to take the transmission out underneath the car will just be a royal pain. So up next, we're going to go ahead and start disconnecting the stuff that we need to pull this transmission out along with the engine. I think the first thing I'm going to tackle is simply disconnecting the clutch linkage, and after that we'll move on to the shift rods, which you cannot see. Let's go ahead and disconnect our clutch linkage, get our cotter pin out of there. I don't think we need pliers for that. Well, maybe we do. Let's see. There we go. 1 cotter pin removed. Well, that was easy. And we need to pull that Little pin out of there. And what about our spring? Let's see. I wonder if we can do that by hand. Look at that. Well, that was easy. What's so hard about that? While we're under here, let's let the spark plug wires drop on our head. And we'll go ahead and disconnect the oil pressure sending unit. I better get a wrench and unscrew that. You know what? Before I do that, I never did drain the oil out of this motor. Let's do that next. All right, we're draining. The oil doesn't have all that many miles on it. I don't see... It actually looks pretty good. And let's see if I smell anything. It smells like oil to me. All right, let's get the old oil filter off next. All right, we removed the oil filter as well, drained the oil out of it, and I basically just put it back up there hand tight. I don't really want to leave it off of the engine while we try to pull the engine. I don't know how much sense that really makes, because it does offer a degree of protection. Let's go ahead and get this oil sender unit out of here as well. Man, everything is really oily, because the valve cover gaskets just never would seal properly. The clutch thing really is the more worrying part. So, all right, so we need to get this thing out of our way, and my finger is on the other end of it, and there's a nut on the other end of it, way down in there. So I'm assuming if I could take that nut off, I can maybe slide that shaft back. So that all may seem trivial, but then again, I've never actually gone through the process of removing the engine and transmission from this car, even though I have had it 25 years. So, all right, so up next, we're gonna get down there and take that little nut out, see if we can get that clutch shaft out. That's life with a C3 Corvette. Everything is just so convenient. All right, we got a little brake clean down in here. So we got these spark plug wire channels here. That's one of them right there. And various and sundry other brackets that for spark plug wire management. Unfortunately, they'll go back in. But anyway, we've got this thing here we're going to take off. Going to take off that nut right there. All right, the other bolt on that spark plug wire holder is right here. You can't see it from up top. You have to get it from below. There we go. And they used a 9/16 on a tiny little sheet metal spark plug holder and put it on there as if life depended on it. All right, I'm about to show you the difference between a stock C3 Corvette motor and a crate motor, or one that's been hot rodded. And the primary difference is this. No one ever puts these back into their engine. They always route the spark plug wires directly from the distributor across the valve cover down to the plugs. Why? Because they're lazy. That's why. And they think it looks better. Just an opinion. Don't get bent out of shape about it. Because they don't want to put these back in there. What's so great about these? Your spark plug wires run through these, and they're not draped all over the engine. It makes the engine bay look a lot more tidy if you can't see all the wires. All right, let's take this cotter pin out of the clutch arm next. It's a mangled cotter pin. Got to use the proper adjective. So right after I got this car in 1997, wasn't too far along after that. There we go. I don't know where it went. Don't really care. Not going to get reused. Ow! Just stabbed myself. Not cool. All right, there we go. Clutch arm released. And now, see that right there? That's your clutch adjustment. And that doesn't get changed, right? So now we know where our clutch goes. So, all right, so the next thing I want to do is disconnect that spring off the clutch arm there. Give ourselves a little more flexibility. Anyway, let me finish my story. Back in '97, I had the I had a new clutch put in this thing back in '97 right after I bought the car because it just wasn't shifting right. And really, it was my lack of experience. Probably didn't need a new clutch, but I had one put in. I had one put in anyway. I suspect the mangle cotter pin came from that. And that was an Amco shop in Pennsylvania, by the way. It's funny the things you remember as time goes on. All right, when in doubt, read the book. So we got the old 1978 Chevrolet service manual out. Looking at the Y series diagram in the clutch section, we got A, X, F, and Y. Y is always for the Corvette, if you didn't know that. The end of the clutch rod here, I'm going to call it the clutch rod for the lack of a better term. Actually, it's called the clutch cross shaft. You have a bolt, and the head of it is up inside the cross shaft, and a few spacers and washers and whatnot. And this bolt simply slips down in that little notch right there, and this nut and this little L-shaped bracket holds it in place. Now, we got the nut off, and we should be able to take this little L-shaped piece of metal and basically just pull it out. It's stuck on there right now with 40 years of grease and grime. So we should be able to pull that out now, and then once we do that, the cross shaft should lift out of the car like that. All right, let's give it a try. All right, I believe we're about there. I can get that, there we go. I got that piece of metal off the end of that shaft. You can't really see it, but it looks like that. That's the one we saw in the manual just now. Excellent. All right, so let's set that aside. And we should be able to now, come on, you can do it. There we go. Just in a little bind. So let's get those parts out of there. Oh, that's nasty. A little brake clean encrusted felt washer of some kind. And we get the bushing released on the other end. And I guess who's going to be having to replace some bushings and whatnot on their clutch. All right, so there we go, folks. There's your clutch crossbar on a 78 Corvette with a 4-speed transmission removed. All right, so we're finding a lot more stuff here that really needs attention in this old car. Stuff that really never saw the light of day until now. And of course, that won't screw out without a wrench. So there's the other end, the little ball joint there on the other end of the cross shaft. Now let's get a wrench and unscrew that from the block. All right, we got the ball joint out there that the clutch cross shaft connects to. That was screwed into the block. And you got a couple of flats on that threaded shaft right there. That's a 1/2 inch. And boy, that's nasty. Of course, the cross shaft was full of grease, so that's what, All right, Talladega is over, and a few days have passed. We're getting back on the old Corvette here. So what we've done, we've disconnected the drive shaft. You got some 7/16 inch bolts here. Those rascals were on there pretty tight, I will tell you. So had to leave the old drive shaft in gear, or the transmission in gear. Take loosen 2 of them, put it back in neutral, flip it over, and do the same thing. Anyway, we got them out of there. Wrap some tape around your joint here. There's a bunch of needle bearings in there. You don't want them falling around and getting all over the place. So in order to get this drive shaft to drop down, just get yourself a little pry bar, slip it between the end of the joint here and the transmission. This is a slip joint, and it'll slip back up inside the transmission just enough to let this drive shaft fall or drop down a little bit, and it's resting on the frame back there. So the drive shaft's good to go. We're all done with that. All right, next thing we're going to do is disconnect the speedometer cable. It's up in there. I can't get to it right now with one hand on the camera, so you just twist it off and it slips out, so no big deal there. And then after that, we'll disconnect the transmission mount bolts, one here and one over here. All right, we're over here on the driver's side of the transmission. Up next, we're going to disconnect this wiring harness. I think that's the reverse light setup, or maybe safety switch or something. And you'll note that it has an adjustment. That little bracket there is at an angle, so I'll have to record that. And also need to disconnect the shift rods. You'll see one right there. There's another one back there behind the wiring. There they are. You can see the two bolts we have to, or the two nuts we have to disconnect from the transmission, and then a third one right here. So, all right, let's get all that disconnected next. All right, here are two of the brackets which hold the shift rods to the transmission. I marked them. F is for front, M is for middle, and the one in the rear is still attached to the shift linkage, which is attached to the shifter in the floor. So I'm not going to take it out. You will note that they are both stamped with out from the factory. I'm assuming they meant to do that to tell you which side goes out. So this side goes toward the driver's side of the car, and the underside near my hand goes toward the transmission. And the slotted end goes on the transmission, and the top end here goes on the shift rod. You'll note that they are slightly offset like that to meet the geometry requirements. And I went ahead and put some Sharpie on them anyway, just to avoid confusion, because you can tell they're different lengths as well. The forward one, the one in the front, is a little shorter than the one in the middle. This is the kind of stuff you don't want to screw up when you're putting it back together. You put it on wrong and you got to take it all apart again. No, we're not doing that. All right, we're going to add to our parts over here. This is the high torque mini racing starter that I mentioned earlier. You know, something that'll crank over a small block. By golly, that'll do it. It has never failed. Excellent, excellent quality. I've had it for 20 years. It's fantastic. I also disconnected the ground cable from the engine to the rail down below. And right now I'm disconnecting the fuel lines, and we'll take the fuel pump off next. All right, I know that looks rather unconventional, but I really didn't feel like crawling back underneath this car again to disconnect that hard line. So there you go, one fuel pump and all of its tentacles removed. You know, when I was a kid in elementary school, there was a huge push in the early to mid 70s to convert the United States to the metric system. Well, apparently in 1978, they had already started in the automotive industry, and thus our fan shroud bolts are 10 millimeter. All right, I probably would have been better off if I'd have read the book on taking this radiator and fan shroud out of this car. I know you Corvette guys probably already know how to do this, but oh well. I've only done it once before. So really the radiator kind of comes out with the fan shroud. And what's going on here is you have the upper control arm right here and over there that it just gets in the way. And the fan shroud has these little indentations on either side of it where the control arm sits, and you cannot lift this up out of there and get it past the control arms unless you sort of bring the radiator out of the car along with it, along for the ride. But nonetheless, we've got it out of there. The bottom part of the radiator kind of bumped up against the air conditioning condenser there, made a little dent in the fins. Before we put everything back together, probably going to do a leak down test on that. All right, I think the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and drop the cross link and the tie rods and whatnot on the steering system, get that out of the way, because it's kind of tucked in underneath the bottom of the engine, sort of right next to the oil pan and where the oil pan drops down. So if we take this engine and try to move it up and move it this way, I think it's just going to bump into the steering stuff. So we're going to go ahead and drop the steering next. All right, up next we're going to be disconnecting all these cross links in the steering system. And I need to disconnect this joint right here. I already got the nut off of it. A number of years ago, I modified a pickling fork. I chopped off the end of one of these pneumatic chisels and welded it to the end of a pickling fork. and stuck it in this thing. Let's see how well this does. All right, I'd like to tell you that my little invention worked, but in reality it didn't. I had to ultimately remove that fancy attachment I welded up and simply insert it in there and use a conventional shop hammer to hammer it out, so that worked fine. But for lighter duty stuff, it does work okay. Got a steering hydraulic ram removed from the car. Up next, we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of the steering components. All right, we've made the executive decision that the steering system on this car is definitely going to get an upgrade. We're going to eliminate the annoying power cylinder and this control valve, because a lot of the stuff that you see underneath here is just leaky power steering fluid. These things never work right. It's been a thorn in my side for 25 years. It's going to go away. We're going to go with a modern upgrade made by a company called Borgeson. And you've probably seen it all over YouTube already, so you can Google that or YouTube it. And but that's the unit we're going to put in here. It'll all this stuff will go away, and the main difference is the steering gear will be completely replaced with a modern updated unit, and the high pressure and the return lines will go straight into that steering gear. It'll be more like a conventional power steering system as opposed to this mess. I was just going to lower this to get the engine out of here, but I'm going to go ahead and just remove all this crap because it's going to get replaced. All right, I think I'm going to stop right there. Got plenty of room to pull this engine out now. Steering is all out of the way. I'll finish fiddling with this later on. Still need to disconnect that control valve from that pitman arm up there, but that's another sub-project in and upon itself. Well, all right, folks, I hate to do it to you, but I think we're going to have to call this a video. We're almost ready to pull this engine out of this Corvette, but I've got 3 different cars down and out right now, and I've got to share my time between all 3 of them. So for right now, we're going to put a hold on the action for the old Corvette, and we're going to concentrate on the other 2 vehicles, namely the parts for the W210 will be in shortly, and we'll need to get that car back into service. And we also have to fabricate a new corner piece on the trunk on our 300 SD. All right, folks, that's a wrap. Appreciate you stopping by the channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you'd like to be notified whenever I release a new video. Don't forget to click that little bell down below. You guys have a good one, and remember to enjoy restoring your classic Corvette.